But before I start talking about what that means, I would like actually to hear back from you to start our discussion so I can frame and structure my thoughts and ideas in terms of a kind of interactive. And I know you've got some instructions on how to deal with Zooms in terms of raising hands, but I won't be responsible for assigning roles for all those who want to speak. So I think Asaka and I'm not missing the name, and the organizers should be taking care of that. So let's start by saying this. We use the terms global, so we say global order or global challenges, but also we use international politics or international order, and we use world order. So in your mind and in your thoughts, if you want just to react very quickly, any one of you, why are we having these terms, and is there any difference between them? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, but the reason why I'm raising this question is because it's very important. It actually tells you where we're coming from to approach this topic about the global challenge and opportunities. So, and this has to do mostly with the ontology that governs our thinking in world politics and in real life. So it's about our perception, about our worldview as researchers and as policy makers, if you wish, decision makers, if you wish, is about how we see the world, how we see ourselves, how we see the world, and how do we see ourselves in this globe, in this universe, in this world. And with that also associated the issue of interests, threats, and opportunities. So what is a threat? And how we evaluate a threat? How we identify there is a threat? So for example, when we say there is Russia poses a strategic threat to the United States, what does that mean? And threat to whom, particularly the United States? So my point of raising these questions, the critical questions, if you wish, is mainly to invite you to rethink and think out of the box. We're used to take things for granted and take terminologies and conceptual frameworks for granted. And in my mind, that in a way negatively impacted our understanding of how the real world works in terms of politics and strategic relations. But to simplify the matter, the key terminologies, the key concepts, the key to understand under international politics, world politics, and global challenges is by focusing on the idea of power and what power means, and how power has first shaped the engagement of individuals and of states and entities and institutions locally and internationally, and then how the very concept of the power itself has developed and changed over time, and how the issues related to competing over power, competing over resources, competing over influence, and power and distribution of power and the balance of power is all about shaping our understanding, our strategic location. So I'm talking about strategic, basically saying about, about geography from geostrategy, from geography, from politics, from IR. So by revisiting, I hope everyone is hearing me. Ala, still connected? Okay, perfect. I'm reading the chat. Perfect. So reminding you again, so revisiting, for example, the IR theories that governs our understanding and explanation of how the world politics works, including identifying global challenges. We might go for realism, neorealism. We might go for liberalism, neoliberalism, constructivism, cultural theory, social theory, or world system theories of how the international politics work. But at the very end, they come to this basic things. The major players in the international politics, what and who decides these players? What are the rules of the game of international politics? Who decides who writes on these rules? And hence comes the issue of threats and security challenges. So, for example, let's take the world order today. We look at the world order, we see there's been a debate about how to describe and call this current world order since the end of Cold War back in 1989, and then the dismissal of the Soviet Union back in 1990 and 1991. It was the unipolar system one day. It was a shared leadership of the world, and then the emergence of a new power. We're referring to China and Russia and some other countries. But basically, what governs the thinking of today, at least from the American and the Western point of view, is what we call it the return of great power competitions. So great power competitions, envisioning the world being, for example, the power in the world distributed between three main players. And these players are not in agreement on how the world should be run, how the globe should be run. So, and these powers are United States, China, and Russia. And they compete between themselves and among themselves in order to achieve more of power and more influence. So any success for Russia in that case, let's say in the Middle East, this constitutes for Americans a kind of a loss, or if you want to talk about, zero-sum game, or a threat. So Russia ambitions in the Middle East would constitute a threat. China, of course, economic power and its rapprochement with some other countries in the region, trying to come closer to the Middle East, trying to impact international trade and international business. All of these things, competing with Americans on the 5G and the new technologies, all these things constitute a threat in terms of losing influence, sphere of influence, losing status, and your opponent, your competitors, is gaining this power at your expense. So this is a good way maybe to envision the world. And if you read the defense strategy for the United States and for China and for Europe, you will see how their perception of the world, the distribution of power, how the world works, and what constitutes threats for this country. So, for example, for the United States, it is this return of a great power competition constitutes the first threat. And that's why, for example, Russia and China are on the top of the list. And then some other, what they call the rogue countries like North Korea and Iran, of course, comes later on. Issues has to do now with the new emerging threats about health and climate change. I'll be talking about that. But issues, for example, that let's say dominated the world thinking back in 2001 and the aftermath of the September 11th is about terrorism and radicalization being a major threat for the United States and other countries. We see this going back. Now, new sets of threats are emerging, has to do with cybersecurity and disruptive technology, as we'll be talking about. So this is just, I wanted to provide you with some framing, some structures of how we should look when we talk about challenges and global challenges and opportunities, and we're talking about security, competition, security, and geostrategic security threats. It all comes to that. I'm trying to simplify. I hope I'm not oversimplifying, but this is something to help you navigate through this course and the courses you're dealing with international security issues. Now, in IR, international relations and political science, we use two certain kind of threats, challenges, global challenges. And these mainly emanate from interstate wars and conflicts. So the Cold War era was all about challenges because, if miscalculation takes place in any part of the world, this might escalate to a comprehensive war. And with that war, there are different types of war, the traditional war and then the nuclear race and nuclear war, which constitute, as we all know, a balance of terror for both players back then. So always the rise of a new power in the traditional way of thinking of the global challenges would always constitute a threat and a challenge for the status quo, for those who are in power today and controlling the game. And that will always, disruption of the balance of power between major players might lead to conflict and might end in a war. So interstate conflict and war is the most important threat. Then comes something has to do with revolutions and ideological thinking. So as we've witnessed in 1917, and then what happened in China, and the new liberal thoughts in Europe, including social democracy, which all, competing for power or competing for certain explanation and perception of the world, and trying to impose their own understanding and values on the rest of the globe. Other challenges has to do with resources. And in terms of resources, I'm talking about, it's not only the scarcity of resources and competition over them, but the maldistribution of them geographically. So who owns what? Who gets what and how? Basics. These always are challenges. Take, for example, oil in the Middle East. And the Europeans' need for that oil, and the Chinese need for that oil, and the Japanese need for that oil, and then the competitions between America and the other powers when who's going to control the oil and the passage of that oil. That being the nerves, the backbone, the heart of the industrial world. Then, no. And comes, so we talk about war, interstate conflict and war, we talk about resources, we talk about revolutions or ideological shifts, which might, lead to a disruption in the status quo or the current arrangements. But in decades, we've been seeing a new emerging security threats and challenges globally. And that's where I really would like you to invest your time of thinking in the coming weeks, months in your course and in your study. And these emerging non-traditional transnational security threats are associated first and most, in my mind, with climate and nature. I'm referring here to environment. Then the global health security issue, the pandemic is only one of it. And then we have the radicalization in all of its forms. It's not the Islamic radicalization. It's not the religious radicalization, but populism, in my mind, is a kind of radicalization. And it's dangerous because it is a closed nationalism very narrow, very limited, and it is actually based on primitive thinking, just like any kind of other radicalization. And we've seen it as aftermath consequences, both in the United States and globally. And then comes the issue of the global inequality. And look, this is serious. Even those who never believed in Marx, they all thinking that, probably he should have waited 100 years. Never seen in the world the inequality indices globally and the maldistribution of wealth and power as it is today. And the numbers, what the top 1% in the world owns and what the rest owns, what the top 10, what the top 15, and what the top 20. And where the money goes, follow the money, they say. And it's not about money. It's about resources, influence, and power. So this global inequality is, aside from its moral complications and moral challenge, it is absolutely constitute a security challenge. So if you look, for example, at all indices within and across North-South, you will see different layers of inequality, which might cause rebellions, protests, civil unrest, and you name it. I'll be coming back to this. And then we having the disruptive technology. The easiest way to look at it is cybersecurity and the recent Biden accusation of the Russians about interference in American elections and the hacking of the systems. So cybersecurity comes priority number one now. Other things people might not consider it as a threat in the old days, but it is seriously is, which is the declines of democracy globally and the human rights violations everywhere. And of course, the failing and failure states. This is something also should be taken seriously. Now, with that, of course, associated some kind of opportunities, but I'll come to them again. I don't know how much time do I have, but probably I need to borrow 5 to 10 minutes to just read through some of my notes on these challenges. And I will start, for example, with the, we're dealing with a pandemic, so let me tell you something about this global health security. Health security and global health security was not regarded as a challenge, was not regarded as a global threat. Was regarded as a state affairs, and it's a local domestic issues. But with these, and this is not a new thing. The Spanish flu, we all know it. It was not Spanish. Limited to Spain. That's spread all over the world. So viruses, diseases, and all these pandemic associated with them are global by nature. It's only recently we started thinking of that, since AIDS and HIV, and then Ebola and SARS and others. And now we're seeing how much negative impact these health security issues can cause to the entire global security and world stability. Given the kind of problems they're creating, not only economically, but the redistribution of political and geostrategic arrangements. I'm not going to talk about the war of vaccines, the vaccinations, and whose vaccine and which vaccine gets to be taken, who decides on that. But I'm talking about how we can stop this pandemic and other pandemics to come. So the global health security is constantly under threat from infectious diseases. It's not something new. Despite advances in biotechnology that have improved diagnosis and treatment of such diseases, delays in detecting outbreaks and the lack of countermeasures for some biological agents continue to pose severe challenges to global health security. There are challenges also associated with the genome editing technologies and the efforts that scientists are undertaking to mitigate them. Overall, this genome editing technologies are poised to have a significant positive influence on global health security over the years to come. But for the time being, there are so many risks associated with them, like outbreak of a well-known agent with a high capacity of depression and or harm, outbreak of a known agent with no properties, outbreak of unknown agent, and challenges in identifying, diagnosing, and treating outbreaks. And then the last thing would be developing new vaccines and therapeutics to deal with these health-related issues. These are serious global challenges, and we are witnessing them firsthand living this pandemic. Now, the other things as I mentioned, is the environment, climate, and nature. So, for example, the study of security implications for climate change has developed rapidly from a nascent area of academic inquiry into an important and thriving research field that traverses epistemological and disciplinary boundaries. Overall, we find that the research community has made important strides in specifying and evaluating plausible indirect causal pathways between climate conditions and a wide set of conflict-related outcomes and the scope conditions that shape this relationship. This is deep and very important. Many studies, for example, have been conducting regarding this matter. They demonstrate significant climate impacts on social unrest in urban settings. They point to the complexity of the climate migration unrest link. They identify how agriculture production patterns shape conflict risk. They investigate understudied outcomes in relation to climate change, such as interstate claims and individual trusts. And they discuss the relevance of this research for users groups across academia and beyond. And also we find that the long-term implications of the gradual climate change and conflict potential of policy responses are important for other research to be followed. Now here we've been, the term that is also dominating the media and the discourse globally is about food security and food security and food security, which is, deeply interrelated with the health issue, health security issue, but also with the climate and environmental changes. Look, about the emission, the gas emission, about the pollution, all the things we've been living for a while now, but only recently we started to connect the possible conflicts associated with the climate changes, because these climate changes, not only they're real, but they're impacting people's lives on a daily basis. And they contribute directly and indirectly to the international settings of power and resources, which means they became a real global challenge and a security threat for all, not only for certain countries or groups. When it comes to radicalization, of course, this is to me is a form of a threat that's been ignored at part and been used for the other part. And using certain ideas / ideology that might radicalize certain targeted populations and groups of people to achieve political end is an old game. The only difference is this used to be, again, local and limited to domestic competitions. Or recently means years ago, decades ago, this has started to be a serious global challenge. Now, given the globalized world and the easy ways of transmitting these ideas through social media and other outlets, and we know the recruitments processes, we know the impact of the social media on, especially in Europeans and in Russia and in different world, the way, for example, Daesh, ISIS use this these tools, and the tide is still using these things, how that is really connecting it to constitute a serious global challenge as well. For example, I'm engaging here at the center on a study about the new trends in radicalization in Jordan and in the region, and identifying the new Salafism. And we've seen how these radicalizations are spreading around the globe in no time, and they're impacting people from different backgrounds. And the use of this technology, the combination of radical ideas with the very advanced technology, put them all together, aside from cyber threat, is a serious global challenge and security threat. But within that, we tend to ignore, for example, or look away from populism as being one of those radicalization forms. I'm not sure if some of you would agree with me on that, but I certainly consider that, Daesh is populists to me, ISIS. There are populist movement. There presents populism in its worst shape. What I'm trying to say is it's no different from other populisms that we see in Europe, in the West, and in different places. So this is issue. Of course, why radicalization? There are a lot of research on that. The social identity, deprivation, psychological explanation, environmental, economic, the interaction. It's huge. And certainly psychopolitical analysis helps in here. But regardless, I'm not trying to explain radicalization per se. How radicalization is a form of global challenge and security threat, and including populism as being part of it. Inequality, my friends, inequality. It's a shame. It's really a moral challenge. It's a real moral challenge for all of us. How poor are getting poorer and rich are getting richer. How the maldistribution of resources been reinforced by bad politics and bad policies. So, for example, the North-South divide in terms of levels of economic development, relative inequality, economic power, political satisfaction, and differential growth are issues to be looked at. And this debate about globalization or international inequality is unsettled yet. How we measure the human well-being, for example. The case that measures of human well-being have been converging worldwide. If this is the case, and the dissatisfaction of state is the result, the experience of material deprivation of large parts of their populace, then the dissatisfaction of the global South could have fallen even without income convergence. And I want you also to take this seriously, the global South. Global South is most of the world. I'll give an example of the research or work we do. For example, migration and refugees. 85% of refugees and migrations are in the global South, from and in. So they migrate within the same area. So despite everything that people want to go to Europe, down to the West, go to the United States, the places in the global South, the movement of people. So either migrants voluntarily for work, or forced migration and refugees. But the discourse, the mindset that governs the issue of refugees and migration in the world is produced 85% of it in the north, while the problem is in the south. Now, the north is not to be blamed for producing this, but the problem is this lead to structural challenge, and to overcome it, you have to re-engage the South, because it's all about domestic. what causes what, and what are the solutions should be. So I always say movement of people is the determinant of international politics. It's involuntarily and forced forms. And since 85% of that is taking place in the South, so the inequality, global inequality between the North and the South, is certainly a threat to global stability and prosperity. Technology, of course, something that we all should be looking at seriously. So disruptive technology, we call this cybersecurity. The diverse requirements of next generation communication system necessitates awareness, flexibility, and intelligence as essential building blocks of future wireless networks. The network of things, the Internet of Things. The awareness can be obtained from the radio signals in the environment using wireless sensing and radio environment mapping, REM. This is, however, combined with threats such as eavesdropping, manipulation, disruption posed by malicious attackers, most importantly, violation of basic human rights and international law. Well, look, this technology, sure, I want you to think of this infosphere. So we're talking about ecosystem, but we never talk about the info system, infosphere, and how technology is part of that, has emerged out of it, and now is shaping and reshaping and manipulating it. And as important and as fruitful and positively contributions these advanced technologies are, they really contain a lot of dangers within them. So after the fourth industrial revolution and its math in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things, and the 4D and the others are changing the way we used to identify social life and political life and security as well. Now, the cybersecurity is only the direct security threats that we're seeing, but the deep changes these disruptive and new technologies are producing in our socio-cultural settings and arrangements will have far lasting and much more important impact than the immediate cybersecurity that we see. Hence, the need to turn this challenge into an opportunity. How would that be the case? This is something we need to look at. And that brings me actually to maybe stop here and see your reactions. And if there are any kind of questions, I hope I will be able to answer it. Thank you.